Hey, y'all, welcome back to another episode of Inside the Wave. I'm here with Isaac Popper. We're going to preview Tulane's front seven. If you missed it, definitely go check out our preview of the secondary where we had Tulane safety Slim on. He talked a little bit about the corners and the safeties to give you all an inside look at what to expect this season. I'm in Madrid, so it's past midnight here, so it's officially Thursday, which I'm counting as game day for me, so I'm super excited about that. Isaac, you got to wait a little longer. I'm going to brag about that a little bit. Um, Obviously, we'll be watching the game at the same time either way. But tell us about the new sponsor that we have for today's episode. It's pretty exciting.
Episode 2 of our Inside the Wave show defensive preview, and I'm here at Bruno's Tavern, an uptown drinking place in your spot to watch all Tulane games. This is a favorite of mine. I went to a few official watch parties for some road games last season, live tweeting with the Uptown Update last season, and excited to do a Fear the Wave, Inside the Wave podcast here at Bruno's today. My favorite fact about Bruno's is that they have the old Gumby mascot head. I don't know how they have it. I asked them and they're not sure either, but the mascot of the Tulane Green Wave from 1964 to 1998, it's really scary. So go and do a quick Google search and see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, definitely go look that up, but don't show it to your kids or you're going to be up all night telling them Gumby's not real. Definitely terrifying. Super exciting about the sponsor. Bruno's was actually the first Tulane bar that I went to. Most freshmen go straight for the boot, but luckily I knew some upperclassmen from my high school who led me the right way. So big fan of Bruno's Tavern. We've already been talking for about 2 minutes. Let's get into some football right now. We've already been waiting all off season. Let's not wait any longer than we have to. We're gonna start with the linebackers. Isaac, tell us about the linebackers on Tulane's roster this year.
All starts with Tyler Grubbs, John. Tyler was somebody I talked to in the spring, and he was really excited to return to the Green Wave this season. Tyler actually committed as soon as he possibly could. On December 4th, he committed to the Tulane Green Wave. This is a player that didn't necessarily need NIL. He didn't need to know who his coach was. He wanted to stay in Uptown. He knows what this program is about. He was an early enrollee the previous year, so he was at La Tech for 3.5 years and then switched into my class in January of 2023, I believe. Yes, and then played the 2023 season for Tulane last year, leading the team in solo tackles last season. Was second in tackles behind Jesus Machado. Jesus Machado, another key player, but unfortunately is injured for the foreseeable future. Hopefully we can get Machado back later this season. That would be a huge piece. Again, he led the team in tackles last season, but as of now, it's Tyler Grubbs out wide. And then in a moment, we'll get to who's going to be playing the middle linebacker role in place of Jesus Machado. Tyler Grubbs actually didn't start week 1 last season. So it's crazy that we're talking, not crazy, but it's interesting that we're talking about Tyler Grubbs as the linebacker this season. He was absolutely phenomenal last season, but the Wave did have Corey Platt, who went down week 1 after having 15 tackles in that game, and Jesus Machado. So now it's Grubbs and Machado, but Machado injured. So Grubbs and then probably Sam Howard at middle linebacker alongside Dixon Agu. Grubbs was huge last season, and he's big in big games against Power 5 opponents over the last 2 years. Only 3 games, so it's a small sample, but he's averaging over 12 tackles per game. And I picked that stat just because I think that Tyler's a player that really gets up for big games and big moments. He was a key player last season. He had a fumble return touchdown in the Military Bowl game. It didn't matter that Willie Fritz had left. He cared about that game because it's a bowl game. He cares about every game. And I'm excited for Tulane fans to get another year of Tyler. Chris Rogers is going to be his backup this season, a transfer from Troy. He was actually one of 4 Troy transfers in a 26-hour period in a December frenzy. Both the sophomore Chris Rogers and Tyler Grubbs, the 5th-year senior, are both 6'3". Chris Rogers actually picked Tulane in the transfer portal over both Cincinnati and Houston, where Willie Fritz went. So good to see Chris Rogers stick with the Wave instead of following Willie Fritz to Houston. And he played all 14 games as a freshman last year. So most of the key freshmen this season, or most of the key players for this season that were true freshmen last year, are going to be redshirt freshmen this season. So Darian Mensah, Mekhi Hughes, Chris Brazel last season. But Chris Rogers is a player who played every single game last season, which is not super common, especially for a freshman, but even at any position. Moving on to middle linebacker, Sam Howard's a transfer from Austin P. This is a big-looking dude. He was very excited to he was not on punt coverage or kickoff coverage in practice, but he just jumped in to the kickoff return in practice the other day and pretended to take it to the house and went right to him, and he just ran with it. But the kickoff coverage team wasn't ready. They weren't actually doing the drills. I believe it was Patrick Durkin was just getting ready to practice and practice his kickoffs and just took an extra one. But Sam Howard is just bringing a good energy to the Tulane team this year, and that's a position where you really need vocal leaders. Tyler Grubbs brings that, and with Machado on the bench until he can come back from injury, that's going to be important from Sam Howard. I personally expect him to start. On the depth chart, it's listed as Howard or Dixon Agu. Dixon Agu is a player that John Summerall keeps referring to as youngster, but Howard is a fifth-year senior, so that makes sense why he's not the youngster. One of two UAC players last season with 100-plus tackles and 10 tackles for loss. For reference here, if he was in FBS, the Football Bowl subdivision, there were only 5 players that did that with 3 passes defended. So he was really stuffing the stat sheet, something we don't really talk about in football. It's something more talked about in basketball, but if there was a player to stuff the stat sheet last season, it was Sam Howard and Austin P. He was actually a captain as a junior, but didn't really play too much. And then another fun fact about him is he was the short snapper. So he was actually snapping on field goals in 3 October 2021 games when Tulane was over dealing with Hurricane Ida, playing at Oklahoma instead of in Yulman versus Oklahoma, and now we'll be at Oklahoma in 2 weeks. Sam Howard was actually snapping for field goals over in the UAC conference. And then Dixon Agu played 1 game last season, just the Military Bowl. Didn't look the greatest in the Military Bowl, but had a huge offseason. Has been a player that the coaches are really, really excited about and has a legitimate chance to be a starter. Could be a Tyler Grubbs situation, even without an injury, where he doesn't start week 1 and ends up starting all the rest of the games. So keep an eye on that. Grew up in Geismar, Louisiana, just an hour away. And then one more linebacker I would be remiss if I did not mention is Mekhi Williams. This is a player I've talked about for a long time. I was really impressed with the fact that he played on special teams last season for Tulane, was on the traveling squad, got in most games last season, and had a huge offseason under his belt. Really, really strong guy, works hard, so strong that he actually broke Malcolm Brown, the defensive tackle who played a lot of years at the Patriots and other teams in the NFL, I believe the Rams, broke Malcolm Brown's
New Orleans
record. He broke Malcolm Brown's weight room record at Steele High School, and he had 146 tackles his senior year in high school. This information was actually from the Fear the Wave cast last season when Mekhi Hughes was a scout team player of the week in an interview with the Fear the Wave staff. So the key here will be replacing Zeus until he is back. And then Jared Small was the third linebacker last season. So getting production out of either Chris Rogers or whoever doesn't really start out of Sam Howard and Dixon Agu.
Yeah, good linebacker room this year. Hate to see the injury bug, but it is a part of football, unfortunately. Luckily, we have a defensive-minded coach who should be able to fix some of the holes that are left there from the injuries, and we've got some good players at linebacker too. I don't know how you bring up Malcolm Brown, and I know you're from Boston originally, and you mentioned the Patriots before you get to the New Orleans team. He played for the Saints for a couple of years. He was a first-round pick. I think he might have been picked 32 when he first came
I
out.
think
But
that's exactly
he was a
right,
solid
actually.
guy. What did he play in college?
Yeah, he was a great player. Yeah,
You know where he
hopefully
went to
Mekhi
college?
Williams has a great career for the Wave and moves on past that. Texas?
Yeah, he played at Texas, and guess what? He was a 5-star recruit, and Texas had another 5-star recruit at the same time at running back, whose name was also Malcolm Brown. So that was a confusing time to be a Malcolm Brown. But yeah, Tulane's got some great linebackers. Might even have better D line. They brought in some transfers. They have some people who transferred in previous years that are really good and still with the program. It all starts with Pat Jenkins up front, the former TCU Horned Frog, Cotton Bowl hero. He's done it all. He actually had, without saying too much, this is the inside the wave portion you get. He had some offers on the table, maybe a little tampering from another school in state, but Pat Jenkins, the Tulane guy, he turned it down, stayed at Tulane for less. So you do that, you're always going to be a Tulane legend in the eyes of the fan base, even before you step on the field. But luckily for us, he's an absolute monster on the field. He was a monster last year. He's gotten even better. Isaac, tell us about the rest of the D-line.
No doubt he's a Tulane legend. Even before this offseason, John, Pat Jenkins was a captain last season, returns as a captain. Not only was he a captain, he was the defensive delegate to speak at Media Day last season with Michael Pratt, and he did it again with Vinnie Murphy this season. He also was one of my iPop's top players and just got nominated to the Senior Bowl. Not only was he on the Senior Bowl, but he was named to 5 individual award watch lists. That's not including the Senior Bowl. So crazy offseason for Pat Jenkins. And I said a lot last season that on the Uptown Update and on Twitter as well, that Tulane had a top 10 defensive line in all of college football. There's a lot of talk they're going to have the best defensive line in the so-called group of 5. I think that based on my projections, we'll see if they can actually do it. But based on the projections, this is once again a top 10 defensive line in college football. So we'll see if they can live up to those expectations. A big reason, in addition to Pat Jenkins, that this is going to be a top 10 defensive line, I believe it will be, is Aiden Huntington. Aiden Huntington, transfer from ULM, had more sacks last season than any Tulane player did on the year, and was also named to the Senior Bowl watch list. He actually just came back from an injury. He was mostly okay for the summer, but was nursing an injury, missed the last scrimmage, but did come back last weekend. So he got a week under his belt of practice. And then at nose tackle, Eric Hicks, a player that doesn't really show up in the stat sheet too much. So again, because I base my iPop's top players based on the stats that I have available, and it's a little bit harder to quantify his value, as well as Patrick Jenkins, because they always double team Patrick Jenkins when he looks like he only has 5.5 sacks on the year, but he's doing a lot more than that because he's freeing up the rest of the defensive line. Eric Hicks was only iPop top player, honorable mention, but he's has 3 seasons as a starter for this team, and he was a huge contributor last year. He's one of 3 players that are in year 6 now with this program. The other 2 being Ethan Hudak, the long snapper and stud, and Caleb Thomas, the utility man on the offensive line. And that's the player that I think will be the first offensive lineman whose name will be called if needed this season that's not starting. Now, John, we have a new position name for this team. We actually have 2. We already talked about Spear with Bailey Slim Despaney, but we also have bandit position. So this was formerly known as the Dog, D-O-G, and was played by Devion Deal. This year, the Tulane depth chart lists 4 players as the starter for the bandit position. So we will all find out who is the starting bandit on tomorrow, or for you today, for Southeastern Louisiana. But I really believe that it's going to be Terrell Allen. I just don't see how he's not the starter. Transferred from Tennessee State in May, and he was Big South Defensive Player of the Year last year. He had 1.32 sacks per game last year. The next most in FCS was Drake's Finn Claypool at 1.04 sacks per game. So Terrell Allen had almost 0.3 sacks per game more than any other player in the entire FCS. So every 3 games, he had an additional more sack than the next best player. That gap from first to second was the same as the gap between Finn Claypool in second and the player in 21st, looking at the sacks leaderboard in FCS last season. And that's multiple conferences of players. Wow. So the 6-foot player, 6 foot but 275 pounds, is probably going to play a lion's share of minutes at Bandit. But we also have Matthew Fobbs-White coming back this season. He was a true freshman last year and did get some action. 2 of his 3 career tackles. This is one of my favorite stats from last season. 2 of his 3 career tackles were forced fumbles last season. This is a player that has had a big impact when he gets to play, and I believe that he'll do the same this season. One of his forced fumbles was on Kyron Drones in the Military Bowl and gave Tulane some hope in that game. Michael Luntz, another player coming back, redshirt junior, will be in the mix. He was a key contributor last season. And then Shaquem Leister, who I was pretty surprised to be seeing at the Bandit position. John Summerall had talked about that position change as something that he liked. And I was like, well, he knows better than me. But I thought that Shaquem Leister looked great in the safety role last season. Also could have played the spear position. Played some anchor last season behind Cam Pettislow. He had a lot of playing time in game 1 last year against South Alabama, and then also had a scoop and score touchdown, which is probably remembered by many for being such a random punt return touchdown against Nichols, an FCS team last season. At defensive end, I want to highlight a little bit more depth because part of the reason that I think this is such a talented D-line is the depth. And that was true for last season. So at defensive end, behind Aiden Huntington, who can also play at the defensive tackle position, is Angela Anderson, a player who is a huge recruit for Tulane in my year, the class of 2020 out of high school. So he's coming back for a 5th year. He was an IPOP's top player, honorable mention last year for his pass rush. Gerard Henderson, who's been talked about by Matty Hudak and others for having a great fall camp. And then Deshaun Baptiste, the redshirt freshman who transferred from Troy that John Summerall has been raving about in press conferences. At defensive tackle, it's Cam Hamilton, a player who I thought was phenomenal last season and the year before, and IPOP's top player, 4th team, so actually ahead of the starter, Eric Hicks at nose tackle. And then Adonis Freelu, who's notably up 15 pounds. Have not seen anybody mention this, but he's added some muscle this season. He got hurt in the conference opener, unfortunately, and didn't return, but he's been contributing since 2020. Before Michael Pratt even took over, in that season, he had 2.5 sacks as a true freshman. And then this defensive line, I just want to highlight how much continuity there is at the defensive tackle, nose tackle, interior positions. The only player out of the top 7 or 8, I would say top 8 defensive tackles, including Gerard Henderson, if you think he can play that position, which he did a little bit in scout team and practice last season. Tulane returned 7 of their top 8 defensive tackles. The only one they lose is Noah Taliancich. And as great as Taliancich was, helping to force the safety in the Cotton Bowl, let's not forget, but was injured for most of last season, causing him to retire and call it quits early despite some remaining eligibility. He only had 2 tackles last season, and I know it's tough for him to play through that. The local really does love Tulane football, but just was tough for him to continue playing. So he's the only defensive tackle that leaves out of your top 8. You bring back 7 of the top 8 with Pat Jenkins, Hicks, Freelo, Parker Peterson, Elijah Champagne, and Gerard Henderson. So I'm excited for Tulane to be a beast on the pass rush again this season.
You and me both. You know, we're about to wrap it up here, but before we do, I wanna leave y'all with a little insight into why you should be excited as a Tulane fan this season. I think this is, not what I was expecting when I first got to Tulane after the 2-10 season, but Tulane's in a position right now where they have a legitimate NFL prospect at just about every position on the team. In the receiver room, certainly tackles, guards, center, linebacker, D line, edge, corner, safety. There's legit NFL prospects, and I'm not just talking about people that have a long shot, but people that front offices are watching film on right now. And that wasn't the case even 5 years ago. So it's an exciting time. By the time you're seeing this, it'll be game day. So, and the time some of y'all are seeing it, game day will be over. So hopefully we are recapping an exciting win. I'm looking forward to getting into some of these out of conference Power 5 games against Kansas State, Oklahoma, and then jumping into conference play is what it's all about. So appreciate your time, Isaac. I enjoy making these videos with you as always. Make sure to like the video so we can push it out to other people. It really helps with the algorithm. Subscribe. Every penny that's earned from this channel goes right back invested into your Tulane Green Wave football team. So it's free. It's free to subscribe. It's free to like the video. Why wouldn't you support in that way? Thanks for watching, and we'll see y'all next time. Roll Wave.
Roll Wave. Go get some jerk chicken nachos from Bruno's.